Okay. Seems to be that every time I try and do this, there is some sort of technology thing that holds me up, or my own inability to understand what I'm meant to be doing. Anyway, I tried to go live on Instagram today, and turns out it didn't work. So I had to take a recording, share it as a reel, because turns out there's rules on Instagram about if you don't have 1,000 followers, you can't go live on Instagram unless you've got more than 1,000 followers. So that really prevents what I thought I was trying to do today. So here we are anyway. Today's thumbnail and today's title, Hybrid Rock Stars, HYROX Racing is letting you down. I was listening to a podcast recently, and they were talking about HYROX versus CrossFit in regards to HYROX being a business that is trying to promote participation and I guess to make money as well, which is, as a business, that's what you want to do. Whereas CrossFit is more in the space of like moving well, longevity, movement standards, functional fitness. And it got me thinking, because they were discussing it too. The person was talking about how they consider HYROX still quite new. And it's kind of just exploded in the last 3 years, even though it's been around for quite some time. Not as long as CrossFit, but still a bit of time prior to it exploding in the last 3 years. And then this person discussing it and actually not realizing that they have movement standards. Particularly, obviously, the wall ball seems to be the thing that comes up all the time, where if you've come from the CrossFit space, you know the wall ball standard is squat depth, hips lower than the knees in the bottom, and then obviously hitting the target at that top position. So what this person, when they were saying, well, they like HYROX in the way of like it's great for participation, it's getting people into functional fitness, it's getting them exposed to those new movements. And essentially this guy was saying, in a few years' time, hopefully they've tidied up their movement standards so that everyone's moving really well. But little did he realize that the wall ball standard actually already exists in the HYROX space. So he then, I guess, was taken a little bit aback by the fact that they do have a standard for their wall balls, and they have used that same standard that CrossFit uses, but they're not really holding anyone to that standard. So today, that's what today's discussion is going to be about. HYROX Racing is letting you down. So I guess the question is, like, why are you doing a HYROX? A lot of people just like the idea of being able to compete and do an event. It's fun to train towards something, and so that's great in the way of being able to participate in some version of some functional fitness event. But at the end of the day, what am I trying to say there? Let me come back to that. I guess what I'll say first is I'm going to just share the screen that has the HYROX rulebook, and we'll start there. And I've highlighted and circled the bit in the rulebook that says like 0.6 on page 32 of the single rulebook. And again, this is the same thing in the doubles rulebook. At the bottom position of the squat, the racer's hips must descend lower than their knees, also known as below parallel or below 90 degrees. So we had a discussion, maybe it was last week, about why don't people squat to depth? And at the end of the day, I think that either they're not aware that they probably should and the benefits of squatting to hips below the knee line or squatting to below parallel, but also no one's telling them. So it's lack of awareness in terms of if someone's watching them squat and they're not squatting to depth, no one's telling them that they're not doing that. So how do they know they're doing it wrong? So I thought it was interesting just to pull this up. So this is the HYROX rule book. HYROX have it written in their rule book that hips must be lower than the knees for the wall ball for that squat position. Let me share this tab. And then a second part in there that is about squat depth. So they're aware that some people don't squat to depth, and they've got a little like if you can't section in the rule book, and it says squat depth boxes. A squat depth box may be used at the judge's discretion to assist in assessing whether a racer's squat meets the required depth. They cannot be requested by a racer. These boxes are not to be used for resting or sitting. They serve solely as a depth indicator, not as a resting opportunity during the workout. Now, I have seen some clips before in the past where people refuse the box. So that's an interesting take too, because this specifically says here they cannot be requested by a racer. So you can't use the box to assist you to hit your target unless your judge, I guess, tells you that that's required from you. So that was interesting to read as well. It's like, what's the purpose of the box then? It's up to the judge to give the box to someone. If the judge can't be bothered or doesn't know, or is, say, one of those people that's like, hey, great job, you're here doing what you came to do, I'm not going to hold you to our standard because you're just participating, then, I mean, in my mind, the athlete who signed up to that race is getting let down by the judge. In the judge's mind, they're being nice, they're letting that person just do whatever they can do in that moment. And maybe that's what they're thinking. They don't want to upset anyone in that moment by telling them that their squat depth is not appropriate when they get to the wall balls, because they're so close to the finish right now. But at what point does someone who's done a number of HYROX races and never squatted to depth finally find out that how they've been doing it has been wrong this whole time? Anyway, so I'm going to come back around and I guess I'll start from what I consider the top. But before I do that, hello, Tony. Get off my digital wall. Hey, Elena. Thanks for being in the chat. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining me live. And we've got lucky camera straps. I can always rely on Justin. When you signed up, did they email you any movement, I'm sure that is meant to say, instructions or videos in the lead up to your race? Not me. I didn't sign up. So I filled in a doubles race in the most recent Melbourne competition with someone who had signed up in doubles and lost their partner. Their partner no longer wanted to do it with them. So last minute, I jumped in and participated in the HYROX Melbourne event as a mixed doubles pair. I didn't get anything emailed to me, but Matt did get some stuff emailed to him. There definitely was a video so you could watch and read to understand the flow of the HYROX race. I'm sure it probably said in there expected movement standards. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know that the way you pass the sandbag from partner to partner I wasn't aware of that as a standard until closer to the event. And so I think that might have been in that video too, that really identified that. So there was some stuff that came out in email prior and in videos prior, but I guess the difference is it's not really being held. The standards aren't really being enforced at the race. Oh, Beck Lightower, thanks for joining me. Does HYROX have the same categories as CrossFit in terms of scaled on RX, or does everyone just go together? So the way it worked in Melbourne, Beck, just for your understanding, you sign up and pretty much everyone is in what would be considered the open division. So there's no scaled or no RX. You're all just, sorry, that's a lie. I lied. There are two weight categories, what they refer to as the pro category, which in the CrossFit gym you would consider RX, and what they refer to as the open, I think it was called, category, which is what you might consider to be scaled or intermediate. So there are differing weights in both of those categories, but the HYROX Pro is like the heavier weight on the movements, the heavier wall ball, the heavier sled push, the heavier sled pull. What else do we do? The heavier kettlebells for the carry, the heavier sandbag. But if you've been doing CrossFit consistently, I would say to you that the pro category has weights that you've probably touched more often than not, whereas the open category, you could be confident going into that slightly lighter loads on those weighted implements there. So do they have the same categories in terms of CrossFit? Not really, because you get to pick whatever you want to go into. Whereas let's use the CrossFit Open as an example, which starts in 3 weeks' time. So don't forget to sign up. If you can do a workout RX, you're encouraged to do it RX. And then from there, you go into the scale division. And then after that, it's the foundations division. At HYROX, you choose what you sign up for. So most people probably start with the open category. They get a feel for the HYROX. And then if they think that they've got the ability to perform the whole thing with the heavier weights, they will advance up into the pro. And it's probably a bigger difference for if you go individually. If you go in pairs, so HYROX doubles, the weights for HYROX doubles for the women are the same as the pro women, but any man that signs up in HYROX doubles, and this might be specifically for mixed doubles, does the open men's weights, which is the women's pro weight. So that's a little confusing thing there. Anyway, enough about that. I don't need to tell you more about how the event runs. In terms of when we started, we were allocated a wave. They started waves every 10 minutes. So imagine the event starts at 8 o'clock in the morning and the last wave goes at 6 p.m. at night. Essentially from 8 o'clock in the morning, every 10 minutes, a new wave of people go, a new wave of people go, a new wave of people go. So there might be 50 to 100 people going in that 10-minute wave. And then you just continue on across the workout, however you sort of progress through it. So you might end up starting a wave an hour before someone else, but they might be so good and you might be challenging yourself so much that by the end of the race, you both finish at the same time. And they have allowed for that in the way they've structured the event. So mass participation is the way the event has been structured. And honestly, it does well. I think only recently I saw there was one that happened in London and they allowed the London event. I think they oversold the London event, and because of the layout of the space that they had the ability to have more people sign up for it. But what happened was I don't think they increased their amount of wall ball stations. So all of these teams got to the wall ball station and they had a 10, 15, 20-minute wait for a wall ball station to free up after they got there. So that is probably the only time HYROX has seen this, like, we've hit a wall and now people have to stand around and wait because we didn't manage our waves well enough with the volume of people we were sending off. Tony again, maybe if someone can't do HYROX, maybe they could start with some low rocks and work their way up. Potentially, Tony, that would be a great starting point. And then once they've done their HYROX, they can do what Justin wants to program, which would be called DIROX instead. All right, back to the start of it all. So HYROX, Hybrid Rockstar, is where that name came from, which when you think about it, I mean, you could look at it in two ways. You could feel really cool, like you're a superstar or a rock star or whatever, or you could kind of think that that's a little bit lame. So I'll let you make your own decisions there from that. But I wanted to talk about it in terms of that. So Hybrid Rockstar, hybrid, running one day, lifting the other day, or separated training. So no mixed modality training. That's kind of where that started. Over the last few years, I've seen people who generally do hybrid training start to talk about what they refer to as compromised training to train for their HYROX races, which is essentially for people who do CrossFit, just mixed modality workouts. So running and lifting, or running and squatting. And so they call it compromised training because rather than running and only running and focusing purely on your running, you might throw squats in there as a way to fatigue your legs more and then have to come back to a run sprint or something. And it is more taxing on you because of the lactic that you've built in your legs, for that example. And so it changes the stimulus of the workout in that way. So you're not just running and then later that day or the following day just squatting. You're now combining the two. Now, it sounds pretty funny because if you're in the CrossFit space, it's like, well, yeah, that's what we do all the time. We combine movements to elicit a stimulus that requires us to be able to manage muscular fatigue, heart rate, skill in that moment, and then progress through. And in that's what we refer to as training. And I think that's why I prefer CrossFit over any other kind of training. It's really interesting to think that too. While I've been limited in the amount of stuff I can do, I actually get quite sad sometimes because I miss out on the fun stuff, as I would refer to it, which is I wouldn't normally sign up to a HYROX, but that's probably why I said yes to it, because I was missing out on a lot of competitive stuff by not being able to use my wrist in the way I once could. After doing the HYROX, though, I was like, I've got a bad wrist. My wrist can't bend. Look, there it is. There it is, bending backwards as much as it can. Bending backwards as much as it can. And I was just like, well, I could do that with a bad wrist. So the skill level in this is quite low, or the requirements in this is quite low. And I guess that's why they say it's accessible to everyone, because if it is for mass participation, you want as many people as possible to be able to participate. So any person at our gym would probably be able to sign up to a HYROX and complete it. The difference being that any person that does HYROX might not necessarily be able to do every workout that we have programmed at CrossFit. So that's the interesting differing there. And with that, what I want to talk about is how CrossFit is general physical preparedness. And now that the HYROX athletes are sort of moving into that compromised training sort of model, that's in my mind, that's the same thing. Doing compromised training is doing GPP work, general physical preparedness, versus, and so in the in the fitness space, CrossFit came into the space and changed the way people saw functional fitness. From that point, gyms popped up everywhere else and promoted functional fitness. That was the way the trend was going. Functional fitness is better. And I was sort of thinking this morning after listening to these people talk on that podcast that potentially HYROX has, what's the best way to describe this? It's like it's letting people down, because people who do HYROX think they're doing functional fitness, but if they're not moving full range of motion or to the prescribed standards, they're actually letting themselves down in the long run, because functional fitness is about longevity, about progressing through your life as independently as possible over time. So that's where my thought processes went this morning when I was thinking about this comment. CrossFit prioritizes standards. Bodybuilders prioritize range of motion. I would argue those two are pretty much the same thing. In the CrossFit space, we are looking for full range of movement, or full range. Gee, did I say moment before? Range of movement. So full movement range, which is the standards in CrossFit. Hey, we expect to see this and this for this movement. When it is, say, the bodybuilding space, you're inside the gym doing bodybuilding, it is well known there that the best hypertrophy comes from if you are moving through full ranges of motion. If you cut things into shorter ranges of motion, the hypertrophy is less or takes longer to gain strength or muscle growth in that particular area. So I guess when it comes to functional fitness, I need to stop putting my hands up. What's the goal? If you're training in functional fitness, is the goal to do a HYROX as fast as possible? Or is that just something to train towards? Or is the purpose of functional fitness to keep you as independent, therefore functional, able to look after yourself for as long as possible? And if you are skirting movement standards or not training full range of motion, is that inevitably letting yourself down because it is cutting those standards or those movements, which will lead you to not have the same functionality or the same independence later in life if you're not training that? And the perfect example would be if you never squat below parallel and then there's no toilet, you're stuck in the bush for whatever reason, how do you poop? Let's just say that for a basic term. If you get what am I trying to say? I notice more and more that toilets get higher and higher. You'll go to public toilets and they'll be so high that your hips will be higher, knees, hips, and that's how you'll be sitting on the toilet with your feet down here, and sometimes you almost have to be up on your tippy toes. And I just wonder that, I'm like, are we creating a society that, well, we can't squat, so we'll make the toilets easier to sit on, and then that progresses to, well, then we still can't squat and we still don't have to aim to be able to do that and therefore we lose our independence being able to sit down on the toilet unless it's high enough. Food for thought. I don't know. What do you guys think? Justin, HYROX is extremely limited as an overall test of fitness. So people training purely for HYROX are missing out on so much. Yes, assuming, and I guess this is a question, are they using HYROX to test fitness, overall fitness, or are they just racing for the sake of racing? Do we use fitness in the same way we talk about, maybe these are in different camps then. Is fitness separate from independence and longevity in later life? Therefore, potentially two separate things. I would like to think they're both the same thing. Fitness being your ability to move large relative to the person, large loads, long distances quickly. Now, quickly when you're 30 is very different to quickly when you're 40. It might actually be better when you're 40. And then as you increase 50, 60, 70. So as an example, when you're a 70-year-old, moving large loads again would be relative. Long distances quickly is going to look very different to what you might have done in your 20s, 30s, 40s, but it's still all relative, and that's still all testing fitness. But as Justin says, HYROX is extremely limited as an overall test of fitness. Absolutely, because the skill level, in my opinion, is so low. Nothing involves hanging off anything or pulling really outside of a ski erg or a sled pull. And it's interesting because I commented, there's someone at our gym, they are in their mid-60s. They said, I would never be able to do a HYROX. And I actually said to them, you could. And they said, I can't run. And I said, you could walk the 8 kilometers of running and you would be able to perform all of the movements that we performed there. And I wouldn't see an issue with you not being able to complete that. This person's very worried sometimes about their inability to squat to depth. So having to squat to a target that is higher than their knee line quite regularly. And the fact that HYROX doesn't hold anyone to standards was another reason why I said to this person, you could turn up there. Apparently you can't ask for a box, but I'm sure that if you asked for it, they would say yes to it. And then you could perform, when you get to the wall balls, her version of wall balls, which is to a target regularly, and then slowly decreasing that target over time to be able to increase her depth, therefore increasing her functional fitness. So just interesting thoughts there. What else did I write in terms of my notes? Just funny to have a rule book that enforces a wall ball standard and then to not have that wall ball standard enforced. And the fact that, and this is the difference between the CrossFit space and what's deemed functional fitness. So if you're at BodyFit, F45, functional group fitness training classes, if you're training for a HYROX and no one's watching your squat depth or commenting on it, why is that? And that comes back to the live I did the other day. Like, why don't coaches tell you? Not even coaches. Why doesn't your PT? Why doesn't your training partner? Why doesn't the person running the class comment if you're not squatting to depth? Why is that? Are they worried about they'll upset you? Is that the purpose? Is that why they keep their mouth shut? What is the reason behind not getting people to strive to be better? Why are you training? If the goal isn't to be better, and again, using the squat as an example, which rolls into the wall ball, if you can't squat to depth or you can't do full depth squat wall balls, what are you actually training for? Are you training just to say you did a HYROX? Is it just about being able to say, I did that event? Or is the bigger picture you're training to be more functional and more independent in your life as you age? In which case, what benefit does not squatting to depth have for you? That would be the question I pose. Outside of that, the specific question I had about HYROX that someone had asked me was, tell me about your experience. I wasn't excited to do it in the first place, which sounds funny. I think I just really love CrossFit that much, and the variance in CrossFit and the gymnastics, the weightlifting and the monostructural movements. And I knew that HYROX wouldn't give me an event that had gymnastics or weightlifting really. And so it was less appealing to me. So why did I say yes? Just as a sake to do something, as just for the sake to do something while I was injured, which sounds funny, because if you're injured, should you not be able to compete in that? Again, it's accessible for mass participation. But the experience itself, I'd heard so many people talk about the fact that it was like a festival vibe. And I didn't really get that when I was there. It was kind of like dull, grungy. Maybe 10 years ago, that would have been exciting because that's kind of where the CrossFit space started. Like you start in a garage and you've got secondhand equipment and it's kind of grungy and it's kind of old school and it's kind of just like we're pulling this together. So maybe I'm just out of touch. I don't know. But yes, lots of people talk about being quite festival vibey. I've been to the Torium Pro. So the Torium Pro, prior to it being a semi-final event for the CrossFit season, and then the Torium Pro being a part of being a qualifier for the CrossFit Games. And I expected, I guess, the festival vibe to reflect what the Torium Pro is like each year when we go there. But maybe that's credit to the guys at Torium who have been running that event. They put on a great show, vendor village, food stalls, DJ, music, like excitement. Whereas at the HYROX, I think just because the goal is to get as many people through this race as possible in a day, it just didn't seem the festival vibe that I expected it to. So again, maybe if you've never done a CrossFit competition before or you've never been to a CrossFit competition before, maybe HYROX does seem quite festival vibey. Maybe, it's probably comparable to like the hype prior to a fun run. But for me, it wasn't what I expected. It didn't really hit the mark in terms of how people described it. And would I sign up again? I wouldn't choose to, but if someone asked me to be a partner with them, I wouldn't say no if that was important to them. Beck, how would someone who does CrossFit train for a HYROX? Would it make sense just to continue to do our classes or WODs with HYROX movements? Keep doing CrossFit and then add some running in. That would be what I would say to most CrossFit people. If you train CrossFit regularly, you'll probably walk into a HYROX and have no real trouble with any of the movements. You might like to simulate the race a little bit to feel transitions, to feel sled pulls and sled pushes if it's not something you would normally do. But I would say at the end of the day, for most people, if you don't regularly do sled pulls or sled pushes, just having some practice on that to see what it feels like. But if you have consistently been coming to CrossFit classes, the only thing I would probably suggest to you is add running in. And if you're already adding running in, it's like, all right, well, let's be a little bit, we could take, 1% further, be a little more specific with how you attack the CrossFit class. But for most people who regularly come to CrossFit, the wobbles, ski erg, the rowing, sled push, sled pull, farmer's carry, sandbag lunges, burpee broad jumps, like you touch on variants. If not those movements, you touch on many variants of those movements in your regular training. So I wouldn't worry so much about feeling like you have to train specifically for HYROX outside of potentially running more. It is 8 kilometers of running total, so you need to be able to manage that. So, obviously it's irregular for a CrossFit class to have that much running in it. So if that's something you're not confident in, then that is what I'd be guiding you to do. And outside of that, understanding that 1 kilometer on movement and then 1 kilometer, then a movement, 1 kilometer, then a movement is going to be how it's broken up. So then, for lack of a better term, you could say doing some compromised training with running and movements, which would be what we do in CrossFit. So perfect example, Monday's workout, run, wall balls, V-ups, wall balls, run. Perfect training stimulus for something that is to build for CrossFit. So as long as you're touching the movements every week or so and adding in running if it's not already regularly part of your routine. That would be the best way to train for a HYROX. But I would just say doing CrossFit is the best way. Would it make sense to just continue to do our classes? Absolutely, Beck. And then little tweaks closer. As an example, maybe subbing out some movement once a week for something that you don't often do. So it could be as simple as what would an example be? Can't think off the top of my head, but we do lunges quite regularly. So probably the easiest thing I could tell you is it's like, hey, the day we've got lunges, I'm pretty confident with lunges. The weight in HYROX isn't that heavy to do lunges for the distance that it is. So on lunging days, I'm going to sub in a sled push instead so that I can get my hands on the sled push and just feel what that heavy load might feel like. That would be my suggestion for it. Thanks for the question, Beck. Where did we start? Hybrid rock stars. Yay. HYROX racing is letting you down. So to summarize that last 30 minutes, I think that if you're HYROX racing, but no one's holding you to the standards that are in the HYROX rulebook, or you're training for more than just a race, like training for life, if you are not moving full range of motion, or at least progressing towards full range of motion just purely to do your HYROX race as fast as possible with poor movement standards, I would say that's letting you down. And I don't think we go to the gym on a day-to-day basis to let ourselves down in the long run, but I think sometimes we go to the gym and forget what the point of going to the gym is for. It's fun to post a picture of your finish time on social media and have everyone say, wow, you're amazing, HYROX is so hard. But is it really that hard if you didn't hold yourself to the standards that were required in the first place? Or did you take a shortcut out of that too? If you actually want to do something really hard, the CrossFit Open's coming up. So in 3 weeks' time, week 1 of the CrossFit Open starts. If you haven't signed up, I'd really encourage you to. If for some reason you're listening to this and you don't come to Dauntless and you are considering signing up to the CrossFit Open, reach out to me because we would love to have you included in the fun atmosphere that is Friday night lights or potentially 9:30 morning lights, if that's the time that suits you better, on a Friday for 3 weeks though. So starting in 3 weeks' time, on the Friday for 3 weeks, 26.1 in 3 weeks, 26.2 the week after, 26.3 the week after that. Just come and join in the fun and see what it's like to be surrounded by a bunch of people that are trying to be better and enjoying the journey while they do it. Awesome. Again, thanks so much for listening. If you spent the time in the chat or on the live, I appreciate you so much. If you saw the Instagram story that I put up and you've come across after the fact, leave me a comment down the bottom, like and subscribe. Turns out if you don't follow me on Instagram, that would be a helpful thing to do too, apparently. So give me a follow over there as well so that I can not have to upload something after the fact, I guess. All right, thanks, everyone.